think of fighters synonymous with pride, Wanderlei Silva is at the top of everyone's list, thanks to a run of dominance that made him one of the most beloved and feared fighters in the world. Much of the same was expected of Silva when he signed for the UFC in 2007, a run which saw plenty of drama, but not the success to go with it. Welcome to the INC, and this is the story of Wanderlei Silva in the UFC. It may surprise you to learn 2007 wasn't Silva's first trip to the octagon. As a 22-year-old with a 5-1 record, Silva was invited to compete in the UFC's first event in Brazil, fighting 3 times for the promotion, including a light heavyweight title shot against Tito Ortiz. But it's his brutal knockout loss to Vitor Belfort that became the defining moment of his first UFC tenure. It was with Pride Fighting Championships, however, that Silva's legend was born. Between 1999 and 2006, the Brazilian broke nearly every record the promotion had to offer, the most wins and knockouts in company history, and a record 4 title defenses during his reign as middleweight champion. Silva's run in Japan also saw him beat some of the sport's all-time greats, with Dan Henderson, Rampage Jackson, and Kazushi Sakuraba, some of the high-profile stars to fall foul of the axe murderer's flurries. By 2005, the Brazilian was widely considered one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world. Although Silva's stock took a hit with losses to Mirko Cro Cop and Dan Henderson, his past achievements made him one of the sport's most sought-after fighters when Pride finally shut its doors. After months of speculation surrounding his future, Silva agreed to a 7-year contract with the UFC in the summer of 2007.
We got him, baby. He's ours.
Yeah.
Wait for this forever. He's ours, everybody. Big fight's coming now.
Recognizing his best days were limited, Silva was thrown in the deep end for his UFC debut. A long-awaited dream match against former light heavyweight champion Chuck Liddell at UFC 79. The match had been anticipated by fans since 2003, when Liddell competed in the Pride Middleweight Grand Prix with the aim of setting up a super fight with the longtime champion. The match would live up to all expectations. Although both men were past their primes, the two rolled back the years with a wild brawl, still considered one of the greatest fights in UFC history. Liddell resorting to his underused wrestling to claim the final win of his MMA career. Despite coming up short, Silva's performance showed he still belonged in the upper echelon of the light heavyweight division, and proved so again in his sophomore outing when he took just 36 seconds to demolish Keith the Dean of Mean Jardine, who had entered the fight off of an upset win over Chuck Liddell 8 months earlier. After a first-round knockout and one of the greatest fights of all time, Silva's stock among MMA fans was the highest it had been for years. That all changed when he was booked in the trilogy fight against his old rival, Quinton Jackson. Silva was vocal in the pre-fight build of his dislike for Jackson, the Brazilian claiming he wasn't taking the fight for money, but for the pure pleasure of knocking him out a 3rd time. The match at UFC 92 would again end in a spectacular fashion, but this time with a very different result.
Good left hand. Silva is out. It is all wow. Quinton Rampage Jackson knocks out Wanderlei Silva.
After the knockout, Silva made his first venture away from the octagon. In 2009, he set up Wand Fighting Team, a state-of-the-art training facility based in his new hometown of Las Vegas. The camp would get its first test that summer, as Silva took on former middleweight champion Rich Franklin for the UFC's first event in Germany. Silva scored the fight's most meaningful strikes by rocking Franklin in the 2nd round, but the former school teacher's technical striking saw him wear Wanderlei down over 15 minutes. A 3rd post-fight bonus did little to ease Wanderlei's disappointment at the fight's decision. After a 5th loss in his past 6 fights, Silva took an extended break from the sport, using the time off to drop to middleweight and fix a long-standing nose issue which had affected his breathing since his loss to Cro Cop in Pride. A new look Wanderlei returned to action against Michael Bisping at UFC 110. nearly submitting the Brit before a final round knockdown saw him claim a unanimous decision. In hindsight, it would prove to be the biggest win of his UFC career. At the time, Silva's move to middleweight was seen as a positive, with many believing it would give the axe murderer a size advantage he'd been lacking in the UFC, while setting up the prospect of potential fights previously unavailable to him. One such match was against the Ultimate Fighter veteran Chris Lieben. The Crippler had been long compared to Silva due to his wild brawling style, and actively campaigned for a match with the veteran following his win over Yoshihiro Akiyama. Silva vs. Lieben was formally booked for the co-main event of UFC 132, with many penciling it as a potential Fight of the Year contender. What followed would be the darkest moment of the Brazilian's career.
Lieben looking to finish him! Chris Lieben trying to finish Silva! It is all over! Wanderlei Silva!
The axe murderer had been crippled 27 seconds into the first round, faster than the Belfort loss 12 years earlier that sparked the turnaround in his career. For the first time, fans and media began speculating about Silva's long-term future in the sport. And while Dana White hinted he'd be open to Silva retiring, the decision ultimately lay with the fighter. Silva instead chose to return to action, scoring a Fight of the Night bonus over Kung Lee before agreeing to a short-notice rematch with Rich Franklin to save a depleted UFC 147. The fight played out similar to the first, with Silva enjoying moments of success and coming close to finishing his opponent in the second round, before Franklin's superior distance management saw him cruise to a decision win. Silva admitting his eagerness to finish the fight in front of his Brazilian fans affected his conditioning come the championship rounds. Wanderlei rolled back the years with a back-and-forth brawl with Brian Stann at the Saitama Super Arena, home of several of his successes during his spell with Pride, before coaching on the Brazilian version of The Ultimate Fighter against Chael Sonnen. A match between the two was penciled for UFC 175 before Sonnen was pulled from the card due to a failed drug test. Unfortunately, Silva himself would suffer a similar fate. In June 2014, Silva was flagged by the Nevada State Athletic Commission for his refusal to comply with a pre-fight drug test, with Wanderlei later admitting he took diuretics to help rehab a wrist injury sustained in a brawl with Sonnen on the show. The NSAC came down hard on Wanderlei, issuing a $70,000 fine and a lifetime ban from MMA despite having no previous history with steroids. Sonnen, meanwhile, was given a 2-year suspension and no fine, despite being the third failed drug test of his career. Silva's ban was eventually reduced to 3 years on appeal, but at 38 years old and with a long spell of inactivity, Wanderlei was released from his contract in January of 2016. But not before burning his bridges on the way out by suggesting the UFC fixed fights. Wanderlei watched his career end at the Bellator MMA retirement home, losing a grudge match with Sonnen at the company's New York show before a second knockout to Rampage Jackson at Bellator 206, which precluded Silva announcing his retirement, admitting he was suffering from symptoms of CTE. Admittedly, a 4-7 record is hard to overlook, but it's difficult to write off Silva's UFC run as a failure. The axe murderer remained competitive against top-ranked talent, with nearly all of his fights boasting some kind of performance bonus, his undoing being the years of pride wars that ultimately wore him down by the time he was octagon-bound. A prime Silva in the UFC remains one of the sport's great what-ifs. And if the flashes we saw were anything to go by, it would have been something truly spectacular. This is the INC, and thank you for watching.